thank you for coming today. This is great to see all women here. I love saying women entrepreneurs. We shouldn't have to say women entrepreneurs. It should just be entrepreneurs, and it should be a much more equitable situation. But this, it's nice to see this, and I'm very encouraged by it. So we're going to start off today with Susan and I are going to talk a little bit about where we see things are for diversity in Silicon Valley and in tech. And then we'll take it away with a whole range of really great presentations all day. So we're going to have just a little conversation about where things are. Susan and I are really old. I'm sorry, Susan, that's the case.
Hey,
so we've been. Well,
I'm older than you are.
Yes, are you? I doubt it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll go right into the presentations. We're going to talk about sort of where we are since we've been around for a long time. All right. So Susan. I started covering the internet in 1992 for the Washington Post when it was still run by the Defense Department, and talked about the transition between government into the commercial sector up until today, which is a very different story. You were in Hollywood before that, another bastion of feminist empowerment.
Actually, I was in magazines and then in television, and
So. Talk a little bit about what you think has changed or not changed.
Wow. I think everything has changed, but I think that it changed most dramatically in the middle of the aughts. Mm-hmm. So I worked for 30 years before I actually went to Gilt, which was in 2008. And the reason I made that shift, and at the time I was at the Martha Stewart Company, was it was really clear to me that the world was completely changing. Even though we had been through the shift to the internet, we had gotten our Macs and all that good stuff. But it really wasn't until, I think, the combination of the launch of Facebook and then all of social, and the launch of the smartphone, that every single industry, every business was transformed, whether they knew it or not, because consumer behavior was changing. And when that happens, I think you either make an effort to get ahead of it and be part of it, or you get left behind. And I think a lot of those legacy businesses or legacy industries are having a really hard time because they tried to hold on to the old business models, the old platforms, but it's also opened up a massive opportunity for all these people.
And yet, continues. The numbers continue to be declining. I do joke about the Sausage Fest thing, but it's really quite astonishing to see fundings, to see changes in computer science degrees, to see numbers at companies like Google and Facebook, which are, I think you could say, have very poor showings in general. It's I think most of the statistics are in the 70s, 80s of white men, essentially, at these companies, in all the key jobs at least. And same thing with startups, same things with venture firms are even worse. Why do you think that is, and what do you think, is it changing, or do you feel like?
I have thought about why this is so many times. I can't tell you, because you would think that the industry that promised to level the playing field for everyone, right, and that came of age after Title IX should be the most inclusive, or heterogeneous sector out there, and it's exactly the opposite. But I think it was partly because the first customers for a lot of what technology created were guys. They were geeky guys. And so nobody thought twice about the fact that the people who were setting themselves up to fund these guys and the people who were creating the products for these guys, they all looked the same, right? Now that the world has changed and everyone is a customer for technology products globally, the idea that the people making these products look like a very small segment of the world seems crazy. And yet,
Well, let's assume
they are changing very fast.
Everyone's not crazy.
Yeah.
But there is, but I'd like to get to sort of the heart of what you think the issue is, because one of the things working in Silicon Valley, I think you sort of live in a strange little bubble there that this is okay, even if you sort of mouth the words that it's important to you in diversity.
Yeah.
One of the things that we were struck by at Recode is we did a very heavy coverage of the Ellen Pao trial. I don't know how many are familiar with it, but it was a pretty important trial in Silicon Valley. Very complex, complicated, no heroes.
We covered it every day.
Yeah,
it was
day.
Great.
I decided to cover it like the Super Bowl, wall-to-wall coverage. And, a lot of people were watching it, were like, why are you covering it so much? And it's because I think it's important.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of people started covering it after we started covering it. And one of the things that's a benefit to being the boss of a site is you can just declare that this is what we're going to cover. But what was interesting about it is that when we were trying to get men especially to talk about the issues beyond just Ellen and who's a complicated subject, we couldn't get anybody in Silicon Valley to give on-the-record quotes about the problem, about the issues beyond PAP, essentially. And what was interesting about that, one of the most prominent CEOs in Silicon Valley told me it's the third rail. I don't want to touch it, kind of thing. And it was a kind of a weird thing to say because I didn't feel like it was that controversial issue. And what was interesting in contrast is when Indiana was passing the laws about not baking cakes for gay people who are getting married. I think that was essentially the law, right? They don't want to make cakes for gay people, right? You don't want your cakes anyway. So they were running, they fell across each other to make quotes about it, to talk about it, to discuss it. But they wouldn't talk about this. And it was a very interesting moment because it made me realize, one, that there's not a serious effort to address it. They'd like it to go away. And the serious efforts to change it are difficult at best.
Yeah. I think that's right.
But I want to understand what you think the reason is. You worked inside of all these corporations. You've been familiar with them. What happens? Because it doesn't necessarily have to happen that way. I mean, I'm thinking of Slack, for example, which is reaching normal diversity levels. I would call them normal. And
maybe the only one, by the way.
But it's clear it works. It can work if you put your mind to it. So what do you think the issues are?
Well, I think they are probably different issues at VCs than they are at technology companies. So at VCs, I think that you would find a lot of young men also saying that it's incredibly hard to get into a partner position, to get to be at the table, to decide you want to make investments. I don't think those partnerships are going to change very fast at all. I think what you're going to have to see is new funding sources coming up that are built differently, where the partnership is made up of men and women, multiracial, because that's the way they believe they're going to attract the best entrepreneurs. They will have a larger pipeline, therefore, all good. But I think the idea of getting legacy VCs that have been doing this for a long time, that don't open their ranks, period, to people, to new partners, or very rarely, they don't want to have to do it. You're right. They want it all to go away. I think the great thing about the Ellen Pao trial, as difficult as it was for her, is that it finally got people talking about it. And that's a start. But I've been stunned by how slow change, or how little change there has been.
So where do you see if you're a woman entrepreneur, where the opportunities are? You have your fund. And one of the things I think one of the most difficult things is in Silicon Valley, at least, they go on and on about a meritocracy, which I think is bullshit. I think it's a mirrorocracy. They're looking at themselves and saying how attractive they all are. And none of them are attractive, by the way. I can say that with certainty. But they look at each other, it's sort of that. But what are you doing differently? How do you look at it? Obviously, There's all kinds of statistics that the adverse population is a better population, a better company. There's all kinds of business cases for it. There's all kinds of, here's your customers, you need to look at your customers, all kinds of things. How do you think about it?
Yeah, and that's exactly how we think about it. We started VBG Ventures because we saw a huge opportunity. And if along the way we also do some good, that's great. But it was because we saw all of these women entrepreneurs who were coming of age and were coming out of B schools as well as out of engineering schools. And I think that's possible now. You know, maybe a decade ago, if you had a great idea, it took real money to build a company. You had to buy servers. There were a whole lot of things you had to do in order to get to market. Now you can get to market even without a full stack engineer and see whether there's a market fit. So that's opened the world to, you know, many, many, many thousands more women, and I would say non-white techies, to see whether there's a market fit. And so for us, the idea of being able to start a fund that said, okay, every company we invest in has to have at least one female founder. That has meant we've seen over 600 companies in a little over a year. And a lot of them have come to us and said, I'm here because I like what you're doing. Right. So yeah, we have got funding from this place and this place, but we'd also like to have VBG Ventures in there. So it's been good for us, and it's also allowed us to share some really good young companies with other VCs who we think are open to it.
So when you're thinking about that idea of having multiple VCs in a fund, what are you looking for when you say it's good that it's a female entrepreneur?
Yeah.
Should that have to be the rule? I mean, in terms of...
No, it shouldn't have to be the rule, but
you see it as
it's the rule for us because it allows us to level the playing field a little bit, right? And we have even had companies say, so if I got a female co-founder, can I come back to you?
Oh, they go find one?
So, well,
some of my best friends are women.
If that happens, that's a good thing. If it gets more guys to think about how to build a company from the start, and we do seed funding. You know, we're not coming in at B rounds and C rounds. We've done a few A rounds, but these are our early stages when teams are forming, and I think that a VC like ours, and there are others too that are starting up like VBG Ventures, we can have an impact on how young entrepreneurs think about building their companies if we have a gating factor like that.
So do you, the last question, and then we'll get to the program today. Does there have to be a big success, a big giant, like a Facebook-like success? There's an example in Silicon Valley which drives me fucking nuts, which is there has to be a Marsha Zuckerberg, like instead of a Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah. And I'm like, he's kind of wimpy. I could probably take him, so you know that's another issue. But he's not actually.
I'd bet on you.
He actually works out a lot lately. That's neither here nor there, apropos of nothing. But does there have to be that? I mean, is that the way things are judged? There has to be some, you know, just right now in Silicon Valley, we're being rocked by this Theranos thing, one of the few.
That's a whole other conversation for us. But no, I don't think there does. But that kind of goes to the way that I think legacy VCs think about what they do. So they're constantly looking for what's the billion-dollar company, or now the deca-billion-dollar company that will be part of our mix here. It's all sort of gaming to get to that, where we don't think about it that way at all. We would love to have many, many, many $100 million companies. That's fabulous. Companies that can last forever and that are doing something that consumers find incredibly valuable. I think there is definitely a difference between the way women go at venture capital than the way men do. And no, there doesn't have to be a Marsha Zuckerberg.
Let's hope not.
Yeah.
Let's hope not. That wouldn't be a very attractive woman in general. So I'm teasing. I'm sure it would be. she would be. All right, so we're going to start the day. There's a lot of stuff, and then and we're going to be talking to a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yep.
And so, in the end, just one quick thing: what biggest tip do you think right now is important for any entrepreneur?
That's a really good question, but I would say one thing that I'm thinking about a lot is really thinking early about what your business model is, and not just thinking that if I get an audience, all good, it'll come, right? But at least understanding, even if you're not going for revenue now, and that's totally fine, I would urge that in some cases for a period of time, but really thinking about how you're going to build a business and what the unit economics of that business are going to be. Is it possible in success for you to build a profitable company?
Oh, profitable! Wow.
I know,
It's
shocking.
a novel piece of advice. All right, thank you, Susan Lyne. And